Hello, my Sanderson friends, and welcome to my top 6 things you might have missed in Oathbringer. It seems to me that the time is now right. We've had enough time since the release, we've started having the conversations over and over on Reddit and on 17th Shard about this fantastic book, and now I want to bring my perspective in on some of the most interesting things that I noticed. Obviously, massive spoilers for Oathbringer, but I also want to caution you, I will be making references to the other worlds of the Cosmere. So if you haven't read some of the books like Elantris and Warbreaker, I'm going to be talking about them most likely in a small scope, but if you want to keep yourself completely clear of all possible spoilers, you may want to stop the video now. You have been warned, spoilers for Oathbringer and other aspects of the Cosmere. Don't mess this up. Now that we got the spoiler warning out of the way, kick back, relax, and enjoy my thoughts on some of the things you might have missed that you probably didn't want to miss. One of the most interesting facts I think I came across that immediately impressed upon me, Honorspren have attempted to rule Shadesmar. This was an interesting revelation to find because Syl is such a nice and kind representative of her, I don't know if I call them race, it's her class of Spren. However, there have been several direct references to the fact that the Honorspren are not so kind to their fellows. It seems like they have this mandate, this belief that they are superior in at least the ability to rule, because they apparently have campaigned in Shadesmar before. Now, one thing we don't know is whether or not this is an aspect of the Honorspren that happened post-Recreance, or is an aspect of their personalities and their mannerisms from ages past. We know that Recreance had a large impact on the way that Spren politics worked in Shadesmar. A lot of things changed. They lost a lot of knowledge because all of the Elder Spren effectively had been destroyed. Because they almost had all their eggs in one basket, it seems. And so, what Spren are now is different from what they were before. Now, what's interesting to me is the fact that Syl, as bonded to Kaladin, sometimes has problems with the conflicting natures of conquest. The ideas of us versus them. While it can be okay as long as he's protecting people, Kaladin has made it a point to bring up over and over again that her viewpoint is very one-sided and forced. It's more about perspective than anything else, and that's a major flaw. And if he brings it up too much, she feels the strain of the problem that comes from fighting other people. However, apparently Honorspren don't have this issue, because they apparently want to rule all the Spren. And I've apparently warred with the Spren. Ivory actually says to Yasna that that Honorspren are people who you fight with and who have attempted to take over. That's an incredible thing to me, and I wonder if we're going to see more about those Honorspren in the future. I mean, the few Honorspren we saw were very militaristic, they were very forceful, and they even seemed to contradict their own natures in order to try and capture Sylphrena, which is just so fascinating to me, because you think of Spren as being locked into this role based on their aptitude, but apparently as they gain sentience, they're able to dally out a little bit here and a little bit there. And it makes me wonder if intelligent Spren can corrupt themselves, and they don't need an unmade to twist them in order for them to fall from their perspective aptitudes. Now, another thing you might have missed, but I'm sure a lot of you didn't, was the fact that there was a Kremling listening to the conversations that Shallan, Adolin, and Kaladin were having in the wine house while they were waiting out a high storm. Or, actually, I think it was an Everstorm. As we know from Edge Dancer, Kremlings aren't always Kremlings. Based on the fact that it's referenced specifically and it had a distinctive pattern, despite the fact that Kaladin completely ignored it, makes me think that it definitely was one of the Sleepless. And I find that there are references to Kremlings in a lot of places in the books. So I'm not going to point all of them out because it's almost like Where's Waldo Cosmere edition, and trying to find the Sleepless amongst us and what they're listening to. I don't know if they got anything really particular from the conversation with Adolin, Shallan, and Kaladin. However, it does mean that the Sleepless are more aware of who they are and probably what they're up to. So keep an eye out for them, and just remember that these beings, as I hope you are aware already, are an amalgamation of Kremlings that form a consciousness that's effectively immortal. They've been around for a long time, and as a matter of fact, I imagine that they're going to become critical in unraveling some of the other secrets of the ancient radiance and even the ancient desolations, because it's very likely that they are containing memories of those wars and memories of the actual events that happened. It's almost like having the ultimate copper mind, somebody who you could literally question about things that happened millennia ago before even the Stormfather was conscious, which is a big issue for Dalinar trying to discover secrets of the ancient ways. Now, I know amongst the fans there's a lot of talk and a lot of excitement that came up when Shallan, Adolin, and Kaladin and Azure were finally able to escape Kolinar's Oathgate and made their way to the lighthouse, where they were eventually transported through Shadesmar. At the lighthouse, we met the crotchety old man, and he was just an enigma wrapped in an awesomeness, because he has so many cool references out there. And I guess I wanted to point out a few of them that you might have missed, because it's pretty easy to see that he was somebody who worked with World Hoppers before and was used to living in Shadesmar. However, here are all the things I noticed, and I want to see if you caught up on some of them too. Besides understanding the basics of realmic theory, he actually makes a saying called Merciful Domo, which of course is a reference to Cell and the peoples on Elantris, which makes me think that's probably where he comes from, although he doesn't seem like an Elantrian to me. Although, the last time we saw an Elantrian on Roshar, he didn't look like an Elantrian either, so who knows? It just seems odd that he would spend all his days effectively twiddling his thumbs sitting inside a lighthouse in the cognitive realm, and I doubt they get too much traffic. I mean, Roshar seems like a dangerous place nowadays. It's also cool though because he actually has a picture of what can only be Elantris. It talks about a city with a massive super high wall that's glowing in the background. I mean, that's Elantris to a T. Now whether that's a picture of his homeland or if it's just a picture from his home nation, we won't really know. But what I found most interesting is the fact he had canned food. Think about that, canned food. It's a lot farther away in technological feats than it is on Roshar. As a matter of fact, I can think of only one place where they actually would have access to canned food. I'm sure on Taldain they have that, but Taldain's kind of isolated right now, so it's unlikely that they're getting regular shipments from there. Instead, I believe this is clearly a reference to Scadrial. We know that the Wax and Wane era of Scadrial is taking place at roughly the same time frame as the Way of Kings section of the Stormlight Archive. We know there's like a couple hundred years difference between the two, and I'm sure that'll be more important later. As a matter of fact, I will be bringing this up again in this list. But for now, we're focusing on the fact that we know that Scadrial has access to canned food. It was a technology that they had during the fall of the Final Empire, although it was isolated. And so now, obviously, canned foods are a thing. And I imagine that it's one of the most lucrative things you could have in the cognitive realm, considering how difficult it is to come across like food and water. Like it's a resource you can't find naturally. You have to trade for it. So it's cool to see a marriage in this one scene of people from Roshar, people from Cell most likely, and items from Scadrial, and who knows what other things there are. I mean, the massive gemstone in the middle, that could just be something that happens naturally on Roshar, but likely they talk about it as if it's something that was brought in from other places, like otherworldly magic. And quite frankly, I don't really know where that could be from yet. I'm not sure if we've seen something similar to it. Considering the man's origins, it's probably from Cell, but we'll find out more, I'm sure. Now we're going to talk about one that was not so secret, and you definitely noticed, but I want to share some of my theories about. The strange knife that Moash uses at the end of the book to kill himself a freaking herald. Holy crap, that thing was insane. So remember, like the brief description of it, it was a golden knife. Like, I guess, I imagine it was probably like somewhere between a dagger and a short sword, because it sounds too fanciful to be just a dagger, but it was specifically mentioned to be kind of a short blade. Now, this didn't act like a shard blade, as in like he was actually able to stab it into him. Now we don't get a clear description, of course, of like blood and visceral, but it definitely didn't seem to be operating like a shard blade. But he stabs it into the crazy herald, and he pulls it out, and it leaks blackness, which sounds almost identical to what Nightblood does, and then the gemstone begins to glow. First off, it's incredible because this is killing somebody who shouldn't be able to be killed. And we know, based on the reaction of some of the other heralds, that this is a real death. Like, not send him back to be able to keep the Oath Pact going type of death, which is probably why we saw it happen in the first place. Odium's original plan to just break himself out of the Oath Pact and to release him unto the Cosmere en masse has kind of failed, with Dalinar refuting to become his avatar or his champion. So now he's on plan B, which seems to be like, I can never be sealed if I kill everyone who was part of the Oath Pact. So once again, it's kind of interesting how Yasna's idea originally in the book was like, to save themselves, they might want to kill some of the heralds to send them back. Probably a temporary solution, but it might be safer to kill them in much normal means than letting Moash go ballistic on these people and sucking out their souls or their essences. Once again, we don't really know how the heralds work exactly. If the gemstone is just collecting some like latent investiture that binds them to life, or if it's something else entirely. Perhaps that's even capturing their cognitive selves or their spiritual selves and ripping them apart. Now, I've talked about up to this point pretty much common knowledge, so here's what we want to go for. Is like, you have to remember Odium has been known as a shard killer. He has ripped shards apart on the fundamental spiritual level. He has destroyed them multiple times. Like, we have accounts of him blowing up like multiple shards from Brandon Sanderson, and we have evidence of it from Honor and his death. Now, we don't know exactly how these deaths work, but we understand that the only way to kill one of these beings properly is to rip them into little pieces and then somehow prevent those pieces from gaining enough sentience and collectiveness that they could ever be gathered up together in one. That would prevent somebody from taking up the power and using it for themselves as like a second avatar or a successor. Now, when you do this fracturing pattern, it talks about being able to rip the soul apart. And we know Odium has the ability to do this. I've been waiting to see something on this for a while, because this ability originated in the hands of men. When Adonisium first fell, he was destroyed by people. It was a god effectively being killed by humans, or human-like entities. We don't know. We don't think all of them were human. I'm sure that there's enough references to say that they all aren't human, and they were probably all from Yolen, but we don't know. It's possible they could have been from other places too. What we do know is that they were able to take Adonisium and they ripped him into pieces, and then they took those pieces and walked away, becoming ascended gods effectively. So we know that they had the capability to do this, and that this capability was something that could be in the hands of a person. So now, go to Odium, who we know has continued to kill pieces of Adonisium in very similar ways to the way that they killed Adonisium to begin with, albeit a much more barbaric and ferocious manner. And now we see him give a very unique physical weapon to Moash. There seems to be this odd combination of magic we've seen on Nalthis with Nightblood and property stealing, very similar to what we see with Hemalurgy, but in gemstone quality. It's almost like a marriage of all the different magics, and we know that even different magic systems will manifest similar abilities on different worlds. Hence, the fact that there's light weaving from Aeolin and a light weaving from Roshar, and now, while they're different, they have very similar principles. So what does all of that mean? Well, this weapon that Moash has could be the weapon that killed Adonisium. Now, I doubt it, because that seems a little heavy-handed to be put inside the system or in the hands of somebody on Roshar. But I do feel that this is at least a copycat of a similar manner. It is somehow a consolidation of that power using and it is being used to kill the unkillable, which is exactly what killing Adonisium was all about. So keep an eye on that blade. I'm sure it'll come up again. I almost wonder if it's Odium's version of an honor blade, but it's based on the technology or the realmic ability of shredding souls into pieces. Now we've gotten through some of the heavier titles ones. Now I'm going to go through a little bit of a lighter noted one. There's a fascinating reference that Syl makes with Kaladin when they're on their adventures exploring his homeland and trying to track down the Voidbringers, quote-unquote, to figure out what they're up to. Syl talks to him about what it was like trying to find him, and talks about how she put herself out into the world, leaving her people behind to try and find him long before she had actually found him. And he asked her, why would you take such a big risk? And she talks about, well, I knew you were ready, and I knew you would bond me. But he's like, but he's like, he counters her, and she's like, well, no, you didn't. I was not even close to being able to be bonding you when you probably popped out into the world. And she says that I just knew. The winds knew you, and I knew that I would find you when you were ready. Now, it's interesting here because she talks about specifically how she knew she would bond Kaladin before Kaladin was actually ready. Like, literally, like the timestamp, she makes it very clear that before he was ready, she knew he would be ready. And that makes me think that the Spren have at least a tiny, tiny bit of an ability to see the future. Maybe not like ATM level seeing in the future, but at least the ability to have that instinctual understanding of when and how. I think it's also tied to the oaths. The fact that people like Kaladin and the other Knights Radiant who are found and selected by Spren independent of like becoming squires are making these oaths naturally, and that each person who makes the oaths, like when the time comes to make the oaths, they know the words. It's less about just spontaneously coming up with something in your mind and more about knowing what to say when to say it. So in my opinion, I feel like we're seeing tiny little glimpses of the future, or at least self-fulfilling prophecy. And the idea that Syl was able to feel that a bond would be prepared for her before the bond was actually prepared is a really good evidence for the fact that Spren don't live by the rules of time like we understand it. They see time differently, and that could be just because they're cognitive beings, but I also just think it has an innate ability because of their tie between cultivation and honor. The fact that they two together probably gives the Spren little abilities that they don't even know they have. Now for the final fact, this one is the one that makes the most impact for me, especially if you follow any of my conversations on 17 Shard. I've been toting a line about this for a while now, and I was shouted down, but I think we've finally found evidence that I might be right. So, when Kaladin and Shallan and Adolin and Azure are in the Spren City trying to find passage to either the perpendicularity in the mountains or to Thelina, we find that the Spren there have really interesting conversations, and they talk about a lot of the things about Shadesmar. One of the Spren that they talk to is kind of giving them the history about like when Odium Spren or Void Spren started appearing in Shadesmar, and like how they were starting to blockade the perpendicularity in the mountain, how they were starting to blockade cultivation's perpendicularity. One of the tidbits that they dropped there that I thought was really interesting was talking about how when the Void Spren first appeared, they came from the Nexus of Imagination. Now it's interesting because the Nexus of Imagination is kind of like what's a mountainous region in the south of Roshar. If you look on the map that comes with the books where it talks about the Shadesmar side of the map, you can see the Nexus of Imagination, and you can also see some of the great expanses where these planes extend into other realms. And you can kind of get a decent idea of where these other realms are based on their descriptions. Now, Nexus of Imagination, we know is a part of the Rosharian system. It's a mountain range that's part of the Roshar Spren world. However, you can see that it borders very, very closely to the expansive vapors. And I believe that this is an intentional reference. Now, the expansive vapors sounds very much like the cognitive realm version of Scadrial. When Secret History, we get a decent glimpse of what it looks like there, and describing it as an expansive vapors is probably the best way you could describe it. For reference, the Expanse of the Broken Sky is probably Cell, and I have no idea what the other one is yet. Now, if we are right, this would actually make a lot of sense. If the Void Spren were called back from some other mission, because we know that Odium has used his Void Spren to kind of extend his reach beyond where he can go, because he's trapped in the Rosharian system. But the Void Spren being called back to Roshar in mass, like getting ready to invade type of calling back, and they seem to come from the vapors. Well, we have pretty much a direct reference to the fact that on Scadrial, around this time, remember the Wax and Wane era, that Scadrial is having a little bit of trouble with outside invaders. We know that at least at the time of the Bands of Mourning, that Scadrial is effectively under siege by a red mist. And we also see that some of the agents of this entity, whatever this entity is, have appeared with glowing red eyes. Now, I pointed out that this is obviously a very simple reference to what we see on Roshar with people who have bonded Void Spren. I was shouted down a little bit there, and I think it was very valid, because it seems like the ideology of the people who are fighting against harmony on Scadrial seem to be toting the line that seems very similar to ambition, and I do believe ambition is a very big part of the invasion on Scadrial. Now, we know that the people on Scadrial who are representing the alternate force, this Trell, this god who they worship instead of harmony, very much totes the line and philosophical beliefs of autonomy. And we know autonomy has been referenced to being aggressive and is like reaching out beyond her planet to kind of bully other people for whatever reason. Probably because she doesn't like people interfering with other people's lives. Which is ironic that she's interfering with other people's lives in order to stop people interfering from people's lives. However, at the end of Bands of Mourning, we see that the Szeth has their own divine immortals. The people who we refer to as the Kandra. And a Kandra person comes into the cell to speak with him with glowing red eyes. Now, this pattern is something we see before. We see the Red Spren, the Void Spren, who kind of mimic, alter, and replace the Spren on Scadrial. They do something very similar, where they kind of mimic what's already there under their own power. And it's so telling that the person who showed up at the cell to talk to Suit had glowing red eyes. That was such a specific detail. I don't think that was a mistake. And now we find out that the Void Spren, when they came back to Roshar to start this formal invasion, when Odium's power started to return, they came from the Sea of Vapor's direction. And that tells me that they are in fact out there. I think that they are a part of the whole debacle that's going on Scadrial. I think that we're going to see Void Spren appearing on other worlds as the instruments of Odium's will, and that perhaps what's actually happening is that Odium is supporting autonomy as she attempts to take over Scadrial, or to at least suppress harmony. It's such an interesting thing, and I love it. I love every second of it. I can't wait to learn more. And there you have it. 6 random facts you might have missed while reading Oathbringer. Now, granted, there's a lot more to it. I think there's a ton of cool things that came up in Oathbringer. I didn't put them all on this list. As a matter of fact, I didn't even talk about Azure, which is such a fun conversation to begin with. But I felt like some of those are a bit, on the head. I didn't want to have a conversation where you're hearing the same things over and over again. I simply wanted to point out some of the things that might have been missed amongst all the other cool revelations we've had. So, what do you guys like about this list? Did you think it was appropriate? Did you see some of these way before I did and think it's super obvious that I put them in this list? Or were they things that you completely missed or are excited to know more about? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts below, and I'd even love to see some of your own lists. What are some of the things you noticed that you really loved? Once again, spoilers are going to be in the comments, so brace yourself. Only go if you are prepared, but my gosh, it's been fun. I am sad it's going to take a little while for us to learn more about the Stormlight Archive, but you know what? Brandon pumps out books like no one else. We should be grateful for the fact that we only have to wait a few years rather than 20 years. And that, there's a realization. The fact is, by the time Stormlight's officially over, most of us are going to be really old. So buckle up and enjoy the ride while you can. So thank you so much for being here. If you like Cosmere content and want to see more of it, I kindly invite you to check out some of the playlists on my channel. I've created a series called Letters from the Cosmere, where I marry fanfiction and theory into one, where I help explain some of the fundamental aspects of the Cosmere for those who are newer to the idea that these books are all tied together. I also like to throw in a little spin, a little story that has an origin with Brandon Sanderson. Not saying it's canon, it's not at all. But Brandon did help me with the foundation of the character, helping me kind of come up with a basic backstory and something that's believable for the universe. So I invite you to check it out. I hope you enjoy my writing, and I'd love to have your thoughts on it as well. It's a great thing to share with your friends who are just barely dipping their toe into the massive pool, the shard pool, that is the Cosmere and 17th shard. And lastly, if you like stories, I also do a lot of visual novel content on my channel. It's a fantastic medium for sharing stories. And as a matter of fact, if I could, I would petition Brandon to eventually make a visual novel that's based in the Cosmere at some point. It'd be really fun to see, letting us kind of have a more interactive look at the Cosmere, but I doubt that's something he'd be interested in. Anyway, if you enjoy stories, I invite you to check it out. If you like anime, definitely check it out. It's really up your alley if you like anime based on the art style that most visual novels come in. But you know what? Thanks for just being around. I'd love to hear your other secrets, and I don't know, you Sander Sprint out there, I hope you have more thoughts and insights to share with me, because I'm certainly not the most knowledgeable person out there. I think I know a decent amount, but there are some people out there, holy crap, that blow me out of the water. So please share your thoughts with me, expand my mind, help me to become a more knowledgeable and thoughtful explorer of the Cosmere. But thank you so much for being here. And until the next video you watch with me, or whatever you have to see me in next, I'll see you there.